Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the GTX 1070 Ti. It doesn't seem to get as much coverage as the standard 1070 or 1080 in retrospective videos, but let's see if it is in fact still worth talking about in 2023. This here is the MSI gaming version, which comes with the iconic red and black twin Forza cooler. The 1070 Ti was one of the last Pascal graphics cards launching in November 2017. It sat between the 1070 and 1080 as well as AMD VEGA 56 and 64 in terms of price and performance, though models like this sat closer to the upper end of the pricing spectrum. Let's get into a selection of games then and see how well it's holding up almost 6 years later. So first up we have Fortnite at 1080p with a medium preset. In games like this, your esports titles, I don't really see the need to crank the settings right up. It's all about trying to combine nice visuals with as many frames as possible, and I think medium here was a nice place to be. 152 FPS on average with some solid percentile lows. Another popular esports game is Apex Legends. Here again I went with reduced settings, this time the lowest apart from the textures, which I set to ultra because we had that performance to spare. TSAA was also enabled. Here we saw 230 FPS with a 1% low of 151 and a 0.1% low of 138. In Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 at 1080p with a balanced preset, SMAA was also set to T2X and normal. We saw 86 frames per second. Now you could certainly turn things down a bit for a higher frame rate if you wanted to, of course, but I think that this again presented a nice sort of balance between visuals and performance. Not to mention that this is on one of the more demanding maps in the game as well, so performance will likely increase elsewhere. Next up we have the newly released Baldur's Gate 3. This can be more demanding than you might think, especially when you turn the settings up. At 1080p with a high preset here and TAA during this opening level, so very early on we saw 70 frames per second with a 1% low of 63. In this game I'd say that frame rate doesn't matter as much as it would in other games, so when I did notice the occasional frame dip, as represented by the 0.1% low, it wasn't really bothersome at all. But I think it still looks great and performance was more than acceptable. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm using Digital Foundry's Xbox One X console equivalent settings, albeit instead of 4K we are using 1080p. Here we saw 84 frames per second. This frame rate will drop a little bit in and around busy town areas, but as you can see by the 1% low, it still stays above 60 FPS, and this was a very smooth experience which still looked great too. Grand Theft Auto 5 is an older game but still very popular. Here I was using the highest settings. MSAA however was off in favour of FXAA as it's far less taxing on the GPU. The advanced settings were also switched on and the sliders were set to full. Softest shadows were enabled. The average here was 99, the 1% low was 72 and the 0.1% low was 64, so no issues with GTA 5, which can still be surprisingly demanding when you crank the settings up, even in 2023, and especially with older GPUs. Hogwarts Legacy next. This is one that can be quite intensive, particularly on Nvidia or older Nvidia cards. Here though I think it was certainly more than playable with 75 FPS on average at the medium preset. It looks quite good too. The 1.1% lows were okay, and here we also had TAA set to low. This is definitely the way I play, and as with all the other games tested, I've generally used settings that I would personally use in order to combine nice visuals with solid performance. In The Last of Us, at 1080p with a medium preset, we had to use FSR 2 set to quality mode. Now without FSR enabled, we were seeing about 45 to 50 FPS, which is still fine, but I wanted to try and hit at least 60 here and show you what I needed to do in order to hit that target, and all we needed to do was choose quality FSR, which doesn't have much of a visual impact at all on the game, not in my opinion. Marvel Spider-Man Remastered next with TAA enabled and the high preset, 88 FPS here. That 1% low was also hitting 60 frames per second and the 0.1% low was coming in at 49, so overall a fairly solid experience, though if you wanted to squeeze a bit more out of this, you could turn things down a little bit or of course enable FSR if you wish. The beauty of PC gaming is of course that you can customise the settings to your liking. Cyberpunk 2077 next, with the high crowds, high textures, thanks to that 8 gigs of VRAM, and the medium preset. FSR 2.1 was enabled and set to quality once again, so 75 FPS here. Without FSR we were seeing just about 60 FPS, though there were certainly drops to the low 50s, sometimes lower than that, so I thought it was definitely worth enabling FSR for Cyberpunk, what is one of the more demanding games tested today. The 1.1% lows also held up fairly well. Forza Horizon 5 looks fantastic, but it also runs really well. With a high preset we were seeing 114 FPS. Using the Ultra preset will impact the frames quite significantly, and Extreme will do so even more, so I think high is a nice place to be. Great visuals combined with excellent performance on an aging card like this. Now, I've recently been playing a lot of the Outer Worlds, the new Spacer's Choice edition. I say new, but it came out earlier this year. It's more demanding than the original, but even on the 1070 Ti, it ran, with the medium preset, at 90 frames per second. The percentile lows were also okay as well, and I think this game looks really nice. If you have an older card, I'd recommend playing the original game, but if you have something more powerful, then this can handle the remaster no problem. Finally then, we have The Witcher 3 with the next gen patch applied. With the Ultra preset here, HBAO Plus was also enabled, SSR was set to low, that's screen space reflections, Hairworks was off, and TAAU was our anti-aliasing solution. Here, with an average of 90 FPS, the game was more than playable, and the percentile lows held up fairly well even in and around those busy city areas. So the 1070 Ti in 2023 is certainly still kicking, and it's a great card if you have a 1080p monitor. If you want to play slightly older games, you can still do so at 1440p, but I definitely think this is more suited, or best suited, to 1920 by 1080 as we progress through the year, and you're going to start to see more titles where we need to implement FSR or some sort of dynamic resolution scaling, that's for sure. But that's all for this one. This has been the 1070 Ti in 2023. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know what you think of the card in the comments, as well as if you use one, of course. Subscribe to the channel if you want to and you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next video.